Welcome everybody to Taking the Tradition On. So it is Tuesday, it is 8 p.m, which means I've got somebody else lovely to talk to for an hour. And tonight, my fabulous guests, as you can see, are Helen East and Rick Wilson. So this whole series of Taking the Tradition On, I've got to say thank you very much to Arts Council England, because thank you to a grant from them. This year I have been doing lots of work to do with a Scottish traveller called Duncan Williamson. He was my mentor. I learned lots of stories and many other things from him, and I inherited several boxes of reel-to-reel tapes. So my project has been getting those tapes digitised, listening to them, and working out the best way of sharing Duncan's ethos, his stories, his songs. So a lot of those stories will be up online eventually through the School of Scottish Studies onto their site, and they are going to be caretaking those tapes and archiving them. But the whole point about Duncan isn't just to put all of his stories in an archive and for them to just stay as they always, to be pickled and aspic. The whole point is this is a moving on tradition. This is a tradition that expands, and how to take those stories on into the world that we are in today, which is a very different world and is constantly changing. It's changed quite drastically since I started this project in September. So these conversations on Zoom are with other people who knew Duncan, who were influenced about his work, to talk about his stories, to tell some of those stories, and why he's still important today. So Helen East and Rick Wilson. There's so much that I could say about you. I'm going to try and be brief. So Rick is a master drummer who studied with lots of other master drummers in his turn. He's apprenticed and journeymaned his way in India and in other countries, learning different techniques. Helen East is a master storyteller. I was very lucky when I was 18 to do a year's storytelling apprenticeship, and famously one of the people that I stayed with and studied with on that year was Duncan Williamson, and I carried on studying with him until eventually he died, and he still had plenty more to teach me. But I had a year staying with lots of different storytellers, and one of those storytellers was Helen East, who started the Common Law Storytellers. She's published about 70 books on all different subjects, all relating to storytelling, how to use storytelling in education, the importance of folklore. I don't know if she's got a Wikipedia entrance, but if she had, it'd be about 3 pages long. But she is a wonderful storyteller. Go and read her books, find out more about it. If I tell you any more, we're going to end up with no hour left. All 3 of us have been incredibly influenced by Duncan Williamson. And some of the people listening here, I know Simon and Shonley and Mike, you all got to meet Duncan, but not everybody did. So Helen and Rick, can you just paint a little picture for us of who Duncan was and what he was like?
Off we go.
Well, he was the most extraordinarily generous person. He would get on a train and befriend everybody on the train, tell them stories, maybe give him a book, which he was supposed to be sold and get some money for him, but he'd just be handing them out. And he had this thing that he could befriend anyone and everyone. I'll give you an example. In America, we were working together, and we were working in this new centre where they hoped people would come in to listen to stories and things. And children came in, and that was all fine and very good. But then we looked out the window, and we saw that there were a whole lot of down and out, sitting down, lying down, having fags down at the bottom of the steps. And the woman trying to get the centre really open for everyone, she said, those are the people that I would like to come. But of course they never will. And Duncan smiled just a little, and he said, "Just have a wee snout," he said, and out he went. And I saw him go down the steps, and then in no time at all, they were sharing stories and this, that, and the other, giving ciggies here and there, and a bit of a laughing. And then the next thing is the whole damn lot of them came up the stairs into the centre, sat down, and Duncan told them the story. He told them the story about a little fairy man, and about a little fella, which I was thinking, he's talking about an old man who's walking along and he's got holes in his shoes, and I looked at all these people who didn't even want to go to the building at all in the first place, riveted. They were just held by him. They were friends with him. He was the most fabulous equalizer I could ever imagine. And I loved him. He was like a second father.
One of the things about Duncan was that there was not at all a line between performing and not. He was a 24/7 man. It was just, stories would come out of him wherever he was, whatever he was doing. If it was a performance for the public, so be it. But if it was mending a car by the roadside, so be it as well. We had both sides of those experiences, and it could go late into the night, it could start early in the morning.
Sometimes there wasn't a break in the middle.
Exactly, yeah, and it could be very relentless, and too much so on occasions, I think some of us found.
But yes, I think you two did have the benefit of being together. So when you would go and visit Duncan, then when you went to bed for the night and shut the door, then you were a couple, so he would definitely leave you alone. And I mean, that was one of the things that I found with Duncan. I mean, he was like the Duracell bunny. I mean, he just never slept. And because I was there on my own, he would just do that thing of coming into me and going, Amy, you're going to lie in your bed all day. It's 10 o'clock. What are you doing? And we'd have been up till 3, and I would drag myself out and go and sit in the kitchen. And it would only be sort of about, an hour later, once I'd fueled myself up on tea, probably had a cigarette, which I would never normally do at that time in the morning. And I got my eyes sort of focused enough to be able to look at the clock, and it would be 6 o'clock instead of 10. And I say, Duncan, it's 6 o'clock. And he go, well, you would have lain in bed till it was 10 if I'd let you. What are we going to do today? And that would it. He'd be like, come on, let's do something. And, so he was probably in his late 60s, 70, and I was 19, and he had far more energy than me.
He did have a really incredible constitution, didn't he? He did abuse himself a lot through his life, I think, with smoking and drinking, but he was made of very strong stuff.
So when was the first time that you went up? Did you go up together? Because obviously you met him before I did, because you were around in the storytelling scene far before me.
We first saw him at Ben Haggerty's first London Storytelling Festival in January '85, and we went up to his place at Strathmiglo in September of that year. Before
we went up, we heard him tell stories, and we went up and started talking to him, and he said, you've got to come up and visit me then. And so we did.
And that was his house in Strathmiglo, which was open to the elements to a degree.
Hole in the roof.
And Betsy and Tommy
where the fire went through.
Betsy and Tommy were quite small then, and it was quite hand to mouth.
So Betsy and Tommy was his children.
Betsy and Tommy were his children, yeah. And Linda was his second wife. And when we got there the first time, we got there sometime in the afternoon, and Linda wasn't there. She'd gone to Edinburgh. And by the time she got back, we'd had a bevy or two with Duncan. So her first acknowledgement to us wasn't particularly friendly, because our arrival had given him an excuse to get going for the day. And so that took a little while to sort out, I think. And then after that, shortly after that, Duncan sent us away to the storytelling, or to the festival at Kirriemuir near Dundee. And we were hitching at that point. Little did Helen know that she was about to enter for the Douglas Storytelling Cup.
I didn't realise it was a competition. It was just it was a room full of people telling stories. And so when I went in, someone on the door said, "Oh, are you going in?" And I said, "Oh, yes." I thought I'd have to sort of pay to go in to listen. But I didn't realise me saying yes was meant I was to take in part in this competition. I've never heard of storytelling competitions. And if I'd known it was a competition, I wouldn't have wanted to do it. As it was, I thought, oh, well, of course, it's rude if somebody asks you to tell a story and you refuse. Well, you should jolly well just do it if you're asked one. So I told the story, and that was all fine. And then the next thing, somehow or other, I got this great silver cup, which we had to hitch back to London with, waving it to stop people.
That was the first meeting at Duncan's own place.
Did you show the cup to Duncan on the way home?
Oh, yeah.
We did call in there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, well, you obviously made up with Linda, because I mean, you're sort of great friends with her now, and I mean, that was the beginning of a relationship with Duncan that went on for sort of 20 years, wasn't it?
I think it only took a couple of hours that day before she warmed up. She was just a bit miffed, really, that it looked like the same old was happening again. And I think, yes, that's right. I think we'd bought a bottle of whiskey. That was probably what started it off.
Yeah.
Just being hospitable, but little knowing really what that was all about.
But by the time we really knew Duncan and he was coming up to London and staying with us there, then we were joining with Linda to try and stop people giving drinks to him all the time, to help get him off the drink. And yeah, so we sort of completely understood where Linda was at. And
but that took a few years, didn't it? It was a span of about 7 years, I think, as I recall.
Yes, that's the magical number of years in stories, isn't it? 7 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, I think that is a total cultural and hospitable thing, though, isn't it? And I think that's something that I think has changed quite a lot now. But I mean, it wasn't just Duncan. I mean, that was, you know, if you appreciated somebody's story or somebody's song, particularly if they were a man, I think it is different. It was different for women. If you enjoyed somebody's story and they were a man, then you would buy them a drink. And everybody enjoyed Duncan's stories, and so they would just be lined up, and it would just be rude not to drink them. So
well, it's a particularly Scottish thing and a particularly Irish thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
We were coming in as complete outsiders into that culture. I had no idea about it, really. It took a long time to begin to fit all the pieces of his life into some meaningful continuum. He's not somebody I ever expected to encounter in my life. You know, me, a sort of lower middle class male from South London, I didn't imagine I'd come across people someone like Duncan from a Scottish traveller tradition. But I'm very glad I did, because it did change certain things considerably for me.
Mm.
So what sort of things then? Because I mean, Helen, you were born in Sweden, Norway. Where were you born?
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. But you lived in lots and lots and lots of different countries before coming to England.
Right.
And Rick, you'd studied in India by that point, and the bit of England that you knew was London. I mean, you suddenly end up in Scotland. I mean, coming into that as a totally different culture, what was it about the Scottish traveller culture and about those stories and Duncan that made you keep coming back? I mean, what you say you got lots of things from that. What was it that you got from that culture and that tradition?
Well, Duncan was very warm and very welcoming, very inclusive, and wanted to give you stories, wanted to share these gems that he had. And he was overwhelmingly warm at times, and is just very magnetic as a personality. So him giving out that, one would want to give something similar back to exchange and develop a relationship. And we did. And I didn't know anything about his tradition. So every conversation with him was some sort of revelation about it for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I knew quite a lot about storytelling because I lived in many countries, and I asked everybody for stories. I grew up with stories told to me from lots of different people, as well as read to me. But I had lots of collections of folk tales and so on, and whatever place I went to, my mum made sure that I got to hear people telling stories, and there were she had 5 children, so it was quite good for her to be able to sort of, you know, send me off to some old person who would tell a story to me. There hasn't been a time in my life that I haven't been listening to stories. I've just always been story mad.
I think unusually, when you got going with Duncan, you could, to a degree, go toe to toe with him, story for story. But probably he outran you in the end.
He did in the end. But when we were in America, we had this deal, right? Story for story. We were competing, never repeat. Yeah.
And how long did you manage to keep going for without repeating, the 2 of you?
We managed. We were dragging up the dregs of things that we hadn't told for years before. But
a week, 2 weeks.
Well, I suppose 2 or 3 weeks, was it? Yeah. But the thing, with Duncan, it was also the ballads. And in Sweden, I went with him to sort of just give him support. They really just wanted Duncan, but I was there to sort of help as well. And there was one night out in a big tent in the forest, and it was just the ballads, and he sang for hours, hour after hour, singing one after another and another and another, ones I'd never heard of. It was quite extraordinary. Luckily, I think a lot of it was recorded, but I was just flabbergasted by the way he could just go straight into another of these long songs.
I think we were very lucky. I think we were very lucky because as time went on, his repertoire of ballads and stories, when he was in the public domain, shrank, and he wasn't doing so much long stuff anymore. but I think we saw him possibly at his prime. I'm not sure. That's a bold statement. But he would take on anything, and you know, the nights were long, and so were the ballads, and so were some of the stories. But yeah, as time went on, he tended to turn to the trusty favourites.
Yes, I think he was tired. But then suddenly he would turn around and say, did you never know about the long songs that the old women used to sing? And he'd be into this whole other thing, you know, even right almost up to the end, he'd suddenly be opening another door.
Mm.
Mm.
And you went camping quite a lot with him, didn't you, as well? And I think that was sort of probably the best time to hear those stories.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about those stories, but there were some people, again, that have never heard Duncan. So what was it about those stories? I mean, can you give us an idea about the flavour of what it is that is so important about those?
Oof.
That spoke to you, or particular favourites?
One characteristic of his stories, which makes it sometimes very hard for anybody else to tell with any authenticity, is that huge chunks of his stories are just dialogues. There's nothing much going on, and the dialogues can be very repetitive, as only he could do. Nobody else could pull that off. And when you think about it and analyze it afterwards, you think, oh, what was that story all about? What was in that story? And it was just the exchanges within it and the humanity within it that was really alive. And it took me a while to twig that, really. I needed to hear quite a lot of stories before that light came on. But I think, yeah, a lot of people have commented that as the years gone by, that there was always this repetitive dialogue, which we sometimes try to imitate, but can't really.
When you say it like that, it doesn't sound terribly appealing at all, I have to say.
Doesn't.
And yet it was. I agree, it was.
In the hands of somebody like him, it's different. It's like he embodied everything about the stories he told. It's like he was there in it. Always he was the embodiment of it, or he might have been there at the time watching it and recounting it. He had such a detailed eye and a way of describing things, even the minutest things. Amazing.
The thing was, he talked to everyone. On a train journey, he'd just be going from, you know, one seat to another and making another friend, and they'd be telling something or having a song or just chatting about something. And you know what it was like, there'd always be, you know, at stations that people wanting some money, and Duncan would always, he might have come out from being paid from a gig or something, he'd see someone begging and he would just have his hand in his pocket and out it was. And he just said to me, money's round because it goes round. And he was so generous in that way. And he was similarly the same with stories.
And he lived his stories 100%, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And he also relived his childhood of hearing those stories. He was holding on to that thing of being in a tent and hearing from his granny or from his father, and those stories, and the whole thing of the pocket of stories and so on. They had no money for books or anything like that, but what they did have was on the tip of their tongue. And he then deliberately started learning ballads and building up that repertoire. So he worked at it too.
Mm.
But
He did have a phenomenal memory. Incredible.
Well, it was photographic. I mean, I've been in the wonderful position of sort of listening to these tapes, and a lot of the tapes Linda recorded while they were doing his autobiography, the Horseman, and he talks about the day that he left home, and it's an hour by hour account of what he did during that time, of the people that they met, of the route that they took, of when they came into a camping ground, the people who were there, the order of the tents, how each tent was built, what colour everybody's horse was. I mean, the detail is unbelievable, and yet at the same time very believable. You know that he is actually recounting exactly what happened, because it was all still there in complete technicolor. And I think he did have a very amazing life. I mean, he had experiences that we just aren't familiar with now and that just don't exist anymore. And then was able to communicate those and remembered them in utter detail, which is a very, very rare combination, to have had those experiences and be able to embody them and describe them and make somebody else feel like they were there in such detail, and for the detail to be exquisite rather than deadly boring is unique.
That's right. Just being dry stone wall building, horse dealing, trading,
Yes.
scrap metal,
Yeah.
all these things which he was involved with and knew the ins and outs of.
And the horse dealing and all that, right at the end of that, way of life, he knew how to work with horses. And for example, he said, "Oh, you know what you'd have to do sometimes if the shoe got broken down and it wasn't, you couldn't walk the pony along the roads, and you'd wear the foot down to the quick. So what we used to do is we used to get an old tire and turn it inside out and make a makeshift sort of shoe and put that on, and that would do you just enough until you could get to the blacksmith." And he just knew, he knew how to build things, make things, and of course set up his tent, whatever, and how to live off whatever was growing nearby, and how to live on the seashore and find enough to eat. This horrible things.
Yes,
But,
he certainly knew about hardship, in a way that made us feel sort of very almost lily-livered.
Yeah. Yeah, sleeping on a sort of metal back of a car without anything soft to be on, and so long as you had a fire, just so long as you had a fire, anything could be endured. And we nearly fell out of that once, because in Norway, we were with my mum as well, and there were signs everywhere in the summer saying no fires, no fires. And I said, "Look, Duncan, we'll have to just make do with a sort of our little camp cooker things and so on." And he said, "No, we won't. No, we won't. We will not do that. We will not do that. If we don't have a fire, then we don't have any supper. That's it." And he said, "We've got to have a fire." And I looked around, and then there was a river, and in the middle of the river there was some sticks and things and a few rocks and so on. And I said, "All right, Duncan, if you can build a fire in the middle of that river, then we can have a fire." And he said, "You're on." There he was, got all these stones and piled them up, and then sticks on top of that. And blow me, he got a fire in the middle of the river, and we all cooked the supper on it. Pure obstinacy.
Yes, he was a very obstinate man at times.
I don't know. I think it'd be great though, paddling while you're doing your cooking. But I think he absolutely was a man of those two halves, and he was a man of extremes and that sort of very passionate nature. And I think you're right. The fire, and you were saying before about the seashore, and for me, I mean, those are the two sort of anchor points of him, really. That always had to be a fire, and it wasn't just about cooking. I mean, there was just everything that came with the fire, just the company and the bringing people together, and stories and fire go together, and they take you into that. A fire takes you slightly into that other place, and Duncan was, I mean, he did walk with kind of one foot in both worlds, and he would tell you a story and go, oh well, the people believe this, but you knew that he also believed it, and there was real heart in those stories. And I know that you and I don't know if anybody able to guess this, Duncan played a particularly special role in both of our lives, and maybe one that you wouldn't think of, because he performed a particular service for you and Rick, and for me and Chris. Just to see if I was going to guess, if anybody knows what Duncan did, which was at the sea, a particular thing that he went to the seaside to do, something that you only do once. So giving people time, because it does take longer to type than to say. And just by the way, for anybody that hasn't discovered it yet, there is the bottom of the screen, there's a chat bar. It's just like a little window if you want to stick stick the chat bar up and have a go. Shane saying baptism, yeah, they've all got it. So yeah, Nick's Selkie wedding, yes. Mike's hand fasting, marriage. So because we were talking about a bit earlier, so this, I mean, obviously I've got the wedding ring that I wear every day, but this is my wedding ring from the first time that we got married, and what I would consider the proper time we got married. So this has lived on a little shelf. So this is my proper wedding ring.
It is. It's a
great.
Yes.
we got one somewhere.
We've got someone, yeah, and
hasn't come to light recently.
And what you had to do. Oh, well, you can tell us what.
No, you will, because I don't know about. It's a cockle, Norman. It's a cockle shell, but it's a cockle shell that's had the
yeah.
So you have to find one that is a ring. Some people call them a mermaid ring, and some people call them a Selkie ring. So it's had that top bit knocked off, so that you can actually you can wear it as a ring. Yeah, my fingers used to be a little bit smaller. we all get older.
Right. What do you remember?
What you mean, the Selkie?
Yeah.
Well, Selkie wedding with Duncan.
You had to take. Is it a what kind of a shell is it? It has sort of two parts to it. What kind of a
mussel or a cockle?
Well, it's not a mussel, or yeah, mussel I suppose would do. Yes, it could be that. So it was two parts of the whole, you see, and so then you separate it, and then you take one piece each, and then you put your back to the sea and you throw them into the water as far as you can, and then you'll be together until the water or something separates it. But if it's never separated, and if it's never found and chucked out, then you will always be together. So
and the idea that you throw them together, so they stay there, and they're very difficult to be found, so that the two of them, yeah, they're weathered together, aren't they? And they travel in the waters together.
Yes.
And as long as they stay together, so will we.
Well, I can't really add to that. I can remember sort of where it was. It was on the west coast, somewhere near Campbelltown and Tarbert. More than that, I can see it. I can see the place in my mind if I think about it.
Was that near the place where we met the travellers who'd been bollarded in?
No, that was like Loch Fyne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a different journey up there.
The beach we went to Tentsmere Forest.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you have to walk and walk and walk through the forest. Eventually, kind of the pine trees clear.
But that's on the east side.
Come out onto the beach.
That's on the east side, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and there was just the three of us, and we had our wedding, and then, of course, I don't know if everybody has to do this after a Selkie wedding, but being with Duncan, I imagine that you played the same game. Did you play quoits? That was our celebration, was to play quoits.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah. You couldn't go to the beach and not have a fire and not play quoits.
Yeah.
But then you can't go to the beach and not have a Selkie story after a Selkie wedding. So, and I know the Selkie stories are really dear to my heart, and I know that you know lots and lots and lots of Selkie stories. And I was trying to think, what is it about those stories? Those stories. Does everybody know what the Selkie stories are? So, and we've been talking about Selkie weddings. So a Selkie is a seal person, and the seal people always have, you can tell them because they've got long dark hair, they've got big brown eyes, and they're usually wearing a seal skin coat. And quite often, I mean, the women are called Rona because Ron is the Gaelic word for seal. And so it's one of those things in a Selkie story, it's really signposted when you meet a Selkie. The rest of the people in the story might not know that they're a Selkie, but the listener always does. And you can see a lot of the time exactly what's coming. And that's actually part of the story. It's not meant to be about surprise. They're almost kind of meditative, and they're absolutely about that place, and they're at that crossing point where the sea meets the land, and you've just got that border of the shore where it can be sea or land, and the people along there can be sea or land as well, and about how that flow goes backwards and forwards, and about the relationship between those two completely different entities of water and land, and how if they don't work together, then everything goes wrong. If there's not a decent relationship, then everything just falls apart, and they're all about that relationship. And I mean, they've just been in my head, so I've been really thinking about those stories, and I know that you spent a lifetime thinking about them as well. And what is it that draws you to them?
I think they're the cream of all the stories, those Selkie stories. Sometimes they're also called Selina. It's just this this ability to step between two worlds, the world of the seals or the water people, and the worlds of the people who lived on the land, and the relationship between them. And sometimes, it was very sort of basic that, in their seal form, you'd view them as an animal, but then they could take off their skin and become a human being. And those stories are the most special stories, because they're moving between two worlds, and in both, and they belong to both those worlds.
Will you tell us one?
Yes. Some of them, some of them are very harsh, and some are very beautiful.
Well, they like the sea.
They are. They are. Well, there was a minister, and he was up on the west coast, and he wasn't originally from that part, so he had a new parish, which didn't make it so easy for him. But he and his wife, they had a little daughter, lovely little daughter. And just got to think of it for a moment, the story. Yes, little Morag. She was half and half, you know. 1 foot on the land and 1 in the water playing. Well, now the minister, one thing is he had, as I said, his little daughter Morag, and he had his wife, of course, but his wife was not so well, so he'd often be left on his own time, and the thing that he really liked was to go fishing. Fishing, he could forget about any difficulties, had a bit of peace and quiet. He loved to catch the fish, although of course he mostly would just pass the fish on to some of his parishioners. But it was having that space and that time to his own. That's what he loved. So now, I'm just imagining it now. So he always used to go to one particular place where he found the fishing was really good. But the one thing that did annoy him was that the seals also would go to his special place. And he'd get in there and they'd get into the nets, and they'd not overtake the fish that was in the nets, but they'd ruin the nets themselves. And the nets were really expensive. It was hard to have that. But it also made him mad that the seals would come and they would bite into the fish so that the fish was spoiled. And he just hated the seals. And one time he went out fishing. He went quite early on a Sunday morning, so he'd have a bit of time to himself. And he went and he saw where his nets had been, and he looked in, and well, there was a good catch in there. And for once, it seemed that the seals hadn't ripped everything and taken half a bite out of the fish. He hadn't ruined that. And then he looked a bit deeper, and he saw there was a little baby seal, just a little tiny one, and didn't seem to have messed up the nets. Hadn't even bitten into the fish. But when he looked at that little seal, he thought, well, all right, you're not causing any trouble now, but you're grown up, and soon enough you'll be wrecking all my nets and stealing all the fish. And he lifted up that little baby seal, and as he did, he saw there was another seal, a big seal, a female seal, and she was watching. And he looked at her and he shook his fist, and then right in front of her, he knocked the little baby seal against the rock until dropped it into the ground. And then he went back. Well, he went back and he didn't feel too good about it. But then if it had grown up, it would have been like all the other seals, just as bad. And when he got back, he started complaining about the seals to his wife, and his wife said, no, you know, the seals, they have as much right to the fish as you do. You should share with them. Oh, I couldn't get over it. But anyway, he was more concerned with the fact that his wife, instead of getting better with all this good fresh air, she seemed to be getting weaker and weaker day by day. And he got in the doctors, anyone who could help. But little by little by little, his wife grew worse and worse and worse until she died. And now he was lost. And as for the little daughter, little Morag, she was only 4 years old. She couldn't understand where her mummy had gone. She was like a lost thing. And he didn't know what to do, and he didn't know how to manage the parish, and he didn't know how to deal with everything and with the little girl. So he put a notice in the village that if somebody could come to be a housekeeper and maybe help with the little girl, he'd pay them well. But it was a couple of days later, he and his little daughter, they were sitting down, having a little bit of supper together, and there was a knock on the door. So the little girl, she went and opened the door to see who it was, and it was a woman. Who is it? It's a lady. It's a lady, said the little girl. Well, bring her in, bring her in. So he brought her in, and he said, yes, can I help you? And she said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm wondering if I could help you. You see, you sent a message that if you wanted a housekeeper or something. Could I help? Well, said the minister, well, it's not just really the housekeeping. It's not that. It's really my little daughter, Morag. See, she's lost her mother, and well, perhaps I could help with that. So we invited her in, and when that little girl, she looked at the Morag, she said, she said, that's looks like you've just made friends. You'd made as good friends as you possibly could. So said the minister, well, that's sorted then. That's sorted. I won't make you work hard. Just look after the little girl. Well, that seemed to be that. Everything was fine. It was wonderful. The little girl, she settled down, and she loved the woman. Oh, she said, by the way, her name was Selina. Oh, she thought that was such a sweet little name, Selina. So Selina and little Morag, she got off as well as they possibly could, and he was happy. And when the minister was busy, and so the little girl, Morag, she'd go out with Selina, and they go along the beach, and they go up and down and up and down. They find shells and all sorts of things. They came back as happy as could be. And that was good. That was very good. But then it suddenly, after a while, he began to find that when they went out onto the beach and did whatever they did there, just walking up and down or whatever it was, it didn't matter. But they'd be coming back and whispering about things and talking about things and giggling together and couldn't seem to explain what was the joke. And he started feeling a little bit out of it between his daughter and this woman, Selina. And then she started to notice that the little girl, she didn't really want to sit down and have her meal with her daddy. She wanted to take little bits of Selina's plate, just a little bit like that. And her father would get a bit cross and say, "Come on now, eat yourself properly. Come on, ignore her." And it began to irritate him more and more and more. He couldn't even get a chance to talk to his own little daughter. It was always just Selina, Selina, Selina. I've got to go with Selina. I might be going out with Selina. He hardly ever saw her. And little by little, he started to think that this woman, Selina, was taking away his daughter from him. The one thing that he had. She was stealing her daughter's love from him. And he decided he must do something about this. So one day, he said, when they were sitting around the table, and just as usual, the little girl cuddling up to the Selina woman, and he looked at her, the woman, and he said, "Well, you know, I think it would be very nice, perhaps, if we were all to go out together. If we were all to go out together as a family, like we used to be. Would you like to come out in the boat with me? Would you, Selina? Would you like to come out for a family trip with all of us together? Oh, yes, of course I would. Of course I would. It would be lovely. Yes. So it was all set up. So the next day, they went down to the boat, and he thought to himself, well, now, what we'll do, we'll be on the boat, and I'll get a chance to have a real talk with her and tell her off for the way she's behaving. And the little girl, she'll just be busy being in the boat, you see. So that was fine. That was fine. And they were rowing out. And they were rowing out. They were rowing out. All right. All right. All right. And at last, when they were far enough out, just about near where he usually set his tent, his nets, yes, he said, I think this is probably about place. Now, I'd like to have a word with you. And he looked at the woman, and she said, what is it? What are you bothering about it? Am I not doing my work well enough? Am I not keeping the little girl happy, or what? Yes, that's just enough. That's enough. That's what you're doing. But you know what you're doing? You know what you're doing? I've seen it. Little by little, you're taking my daughter away from me. Taking her right away from me. The only thing I have that I loved, and you're trying to steal her away from her. And the woman She looked at him and she laughed. And she said, "Ha, Minister, I'm only doing to you just as you have done to me." "What do you mean? What do you mean?" he said. "I've never done anything to you. And as for you, you're trying to take away the only thing that I have, love, in my love." "Ah, yes," says the woman. "Do you not remember? Do you not remember that you did just the same to me? Do you not remember when you took my little child, my little seal, my little pup, and you killed it against the rock?" And then she put her arms around the little girl and she tipped the both of them out into the water. And the minister, he was looking. Where was the girl? Where was the girl? Where was the woman? There was the woman. They were not to be seen. But then, all of a sudden, up came two seals. One, a very young little seal, and the other, a fully grown female seal. And they looked up at the minister, and they both went away.
Such a fabulous story, Helen. Thank you so much. And there's so many things that I wanted to ask you, because I don't want to be always looking back, but looking forward as well, and looking what we've got from Duncan and what we're going to take. But I don't really want to say too much after that story. I want to leave us in the power and the beauty of that story. And lots of people are saying that to you as well. So Fleur's saying fantastic and how beautiful it was, and the same with Shane Ibbs. He's saying powerful, beautiful story. So I'm not going to say too much more, but we have got lots of lovely people with us, and there is a Q&A at the bottom. So if there's anybody else who's got a burning desire and a burning question that they want to ask Helen and Rick, then now is your opportunity. Now is your time. And if you stick something up on the Q&A, then I can let you talk as well, so that you can ask your own. On the sea. And in that moment, and I think it's such a good example of the seal stories, that one, because they are like the sea, and they are harsh and beautiful and powerful, and the seals are very, very direct, and yet she had more compassion than the minister. So I think everybody else is just sat and bathing in the story as well. Nobody said anything on the Q&A, so I'm going to ask you instead of just, what do you think is the main change for you that you've taken on into your life from having known Duncan?
Ooh. Well,
I would say a generosity of spirit, kind of. His generosity of spirit reminds me to try and keep that way, even though he wasn't like that all the time. But when he manifested it in huge quantities, and it was something to behold. I think that's something worth reminding oneself about, that you can always give a bit more. And well, what you sow you shall reap.
How about you, Helen?
from Duncan, oh,
Oh, don't worry. I can hear him. When I hear you tell, it's a beautiful blend of you and him. And
it's that he opened the whole world of the Travellers for a start. I mean, I just he opened up whole ways of being, actually. It was like an element, a natural element, if you know what I mean. I mean, it made me a lot closer to place and space and the fact that you can get by on absolute nothing. Enormous generosity of spirit, and a terrible temper. I mean, he could. If I offended Duncan, which I did occasionally, you know, I would be crying to him to forgive me. I mean, I didn't do it often.
I think when he fell out with people, he really fell out.
Yes, yes, yeah.
And what David Campbell said to you in the interview a couple of weeks back just bears that out big time.
Oh, I remember.
But it wouldn't necessarily be forever.
No, but it could last a long time.
Yeah,
I put Nick. I've allowed you to talk. Nick's put up a question. I'm gonna let you talk, Nick.
Great. Hello. Hi, Rick. Hi, Helen.
Hello.
So I'm wondering what I mean, the question was what you missed most about Duncan, but I suppose I don't really mean just you. I mean the kind of the collective, the storytelling world. What was that? What was the role that he fulfilled, or what did he give us that you really feel is either still present because of his work or is missing? It kind of what do we all miss from him? I
feel like he stepped out of the stories he told. He was there. He described the smells that were there in the stories. He described what he saw around in only a way of somebody who can have lived the life. That's possibly a difference between a good storyteller and a real extraordinary storyteller, possibly. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. Yeah, he did just transport you. But he also had this whole thing that all these material things were completely irrelevant. And where I look around here at all my things, that are mine.
Yes, and he did famously give away books that he was transporting to accompany his gigs and his tours. On trains, he would just give them away to people.
It would be so terrible because Linda would give me a big box of his books to sell, and he would just be going down the train and just giving them to people. And I would have to secretly go and say, look, I'm terribly sorry, but do you think you could give some of these back? Because he'll, because they would try and pay for him, and he would go, no. wouldn't he would just give it to them.
You don't meet many people like that in your life, do you?
Yes.
Normally.
So then I would creep along, and then I'd say, do you think you could give me just a little bit? and they was going, of course. And if Duncan had seen me do that, he would never have forgiven me. But I had to do it so that there would be things that, to make money for him.
And because then he wouldn't have the money to pay the publisher either, because obviously, Linda had already paid for those books. It wasn't like he was just giving them away. You had to recoup the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna Fleur. I'm just looking for you, Fleur. This might be quite a long answer, Fleur, but I'm gonna put Fleur on as well. Fleur, come and have a chat with us.
What there?
Hopefully, I'll put Fleur on.
Sorry.
Fleur, you can talk.
Hi.
We can hear you.
Hi,
Hello.
can you hear me now?
We can
Yes.
hear you beautifully.
Brilliant. Hi. Yeah, I did meet him a couple of times, and I loved the way he talked about being in the woods, and that he knew about all of the flora and fauna in the woods, and he knew the names of everything, and that he could catch a minnow with his bare hands, and just really lovely things like that. And I was really hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about that, about his relationship to the plants and animals in the woods, to his relationship to the natural world.
Well, not very sentimental. He considered sort of he lived, because he grew up in a bender, in a forest. They were brought up to be very not to waste at all. And for example, if Duncan was sent to get some water for drinking from a stream, and he came back and there was a little minnow or something that he hadn't noticed, a tiny little creature in there, his father would make him go all the way back to the stream and put it back in. You do not take life away unless you need it. So that's extraordinary care for the
Sorry to butt in, Helen, but I mean, Linda's been putting up some great stories about Duncan up on her Facebook page as well, Linda Williamson. And with that going, I mean, it was quite a long walk to go and get water. And he told me, and I mean, Linda's written it up recently, particularly about that happening with the water boatmen.
Yeah,
yeah.
Because they clean the water. And it was just like, if you take those water boatmen out, and when we go back, the water will be dirty. They live there, you've taken them out of their environment, they're there working for us, and you have paid them no attention and no care. And that was just a terrible, heinous sin, you know. It's kind of, you're destroying your own water. And there's so many examples of that, I think.
And respect for the fire. You know, someone did a play about travellers. And one of the things in it was that somebody pissed on the fire. And Duncan was outraged because he said no traveller would ever do such disrespect to the fire. Without the fire, where would we be? So
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
What did he tell you that you particularly liked about the woods and the herbs, Fleur? What's your memory of that?
Well,
one of the stories about one of his siblings having a cough. He said it was a whooping cough. It sounds like croup to me, but he said it was a whooping cough. And so his dad said to him, go down to the river, catch a little minnow, bring it back. So he had to go all the way down to the river, catch a minnow. He brought it back. The child was still coughing like whooping cough. He got the child to put the fish in the open mouth, in their open mouth. Okay, so the kid had to open their mouth. He put the fish in the mouth, and the fish did the, you know, I don't know if you can hear that.
We can.
And it cured the child. Okay. And then the fish got put back in the water. And I told that to a friend of mine ages ago, and he was saying, oh yeah, well when I was when I had small children and they were car sick in the back of the car, I used to say to them, sit on the paper, just sit on the newspaper and then you won't be sick. And he was taking Duncan's story as being a story about just sort of tricking a child into not sort of being ill anymore. Do you see what I mean? Like it's a kind of placebo or something. But it just seemed like the way that he told it, that it was actually really true, that a fish gasping for breath in your mouth would actually cure you of a terrible croup or cold or something, you know, because he could just tell you, he could sort of weave the world in such a magical way that you just really believed it.
Yeah, well
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, you did hear about the slug, didn't you? That I actually literally saw him charm a slug.
Yeah. Yes.
No,
No?
I haven't
No,
heard
what?
this.
It
Yes,
was
yeah.
at Bledford. It was at Bledford, you know, storytelling workshop. Do you know Jenny Pearson used to run it, and Michael Harvey was there.
Yeah.
And this girl called Nikki, she wanted to record him singing the Wales song.
Mm.
And so we went behind the workshop area where there's these little steps, and they went up into the orchard, and I was camping in the orchard, and that morning I'd been really rude to this enormous slug that was outside of my tent, and I think that that particular slug was the one that was sitting on the steps when we went round to record this story. And Duncan went straight up to it and he greeted it. So you're talking about him greeting and making friends. He made friends with this slug. He was so polite. I was absolutely cringing behind him because I'd just been so rude to it earlier in the morning. And then he sat down and sang the song, and the slug, it rose right up on its back foot and extended out its antennae and danced to him singing this song. And I've got a picture of it. I mean, he literally made a slug dance. It was just incredible.
And have you been nice to slugs ever since?
Yeah, but I am a gardener, so sometimes I have to be strict.
Yes, you do. Yes.
Yes. And sort of end up moving them, sort of taking them in the car and dropping them off, and them coming back 5 weeks later to come. But it does, yeah. But I mean, he also would kind of have an area, like in his garden, he would have a corner that was for the slugs and the snails, and he would just tell them to go over there, you know. And you know, we can all do that. It's just they don't seem to listen to everybody. But he did. I mean, there was that fey side to him and that magical side to him. And I think I might have told you about this, Fleur, but I don't know if I told everybody else. And Nick probably will remember this. Of being, we used to go to Whitby every year, to Whitby Folk Festival, and obviously Mike's listening, who's very, very involved with Whitby. And I would sort of, you know, always stay in the same B&B with Duncan, and we would, and you know, part of my role was to get him around and lug all of his stuff and get him a taxi if he'd had enough of walking. And there was one particular year, and there was a seal that would come into the harbour, and every time we went over to the Fisherman's Rowing Club, which is kind of on this spur on the far side of Whitby, and we would tell, the seal would swim up so that you could see it out of the window of the Fisherman's Rowing Club, and it would be there for the entire of Duncan's set. And then when we finished, it would turn and it would swim away. And I mean, it wasn't just once, it kept happening through the whole of the week, that this seal was just following Duncan around. And every time Duncan was telling and anywhere near, he would just come up, he would just be able to look out and see this young seal out there. It was just amazing.
Yeah, there was a bit of the shaman about Duncan, I suppose, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Well, he did say that he had been rescued by a seal woman from drowning when he was a child, and that when he died, that's where he would go back. He would go back to the sea, and he was waiting for his seal coat, and he would go back.
Wow, that's really amazing. What happened? Could you tell us about that?
What about him?
What happened when he was nearly? Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how he got in a position where he was drowning. I think he had underestimated the tide. and he, because he knew the tides, and because obviously he was quite a wild child and he was trusted, his parents had brought him up so that he knew what he was doing, he did have free reign, and so he'd been out, and I think he was caught by the tide, and he was just overconfident, and he got to that bit where he was just in that breaking line where you're not actually that far from the shore, but you can't get past the waves, and every time you're trying to come in, then the wave is just knocking you down and pushing you under. And he just had reached that moment of panic when he wasn't going to be able to come in, and then there was something under him and he thought it was a seal, and then there were arms around him, and then there was a woman who had brown eyes who was sort of had him on the shore, and she was a seal woman, and he talked to her, and she gave him the choice about whether to go with her or to stay, and he chose to stay, but that one day he would go back.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know. Yeah.
That's really incredible.
But I think that was that thing, kind of depending who he was talking to, he would quite often introduce the seals and the seal people as well. It was a comfort to the fishing people if they could think, if their people were lost at sea, that perhaps they would come back, and there were stories, and they would come back a year or so later, and maybe they'd be knocked on the head, and maybe they'd have amnesia, and they came back with some sort of hallucination of being with the seal people, and it gave the people comfort.
Yeah.
And that was just a load of absolute blarney, that wasn't what he believed at all. But if he didn't think that people were going to be on board with that, then he wouldn't discredit the stories by putting people off at the beginning. So he would kind of meet them in that halfway place, and he would give them the stories and just let them make up their own mind about how much truth they wanted to take from those stories, because the stories they speak for themselves. So I've overrun terribly again, and it's just so lovely though. It's so lovely sort of to sit and chat, and it's great to have your memories, Fleur, and to talk about Nick. But it is now 9:20, and Helen and Rick, there is a podcast. So I recorded before we were all sentenced to our houses, not allowed to go and visit each other anymore. I did record a podcast with Helen. So if you want to hear some more of Helen, then there's a link to that on my website. And Helen and Rick are fairly easy to email and ask more questions to. I'm just carrying on doing this and working about Duncan and working on his stories, and I'm always available for emails and chats, and there's quite a lot of stuff on my website. I'm going to be here again next week, and I'm hoping I've got somebody really exciting for next week, but she hasn't confirmed, so I can't announce it till I know for sure. But I will definitely be here with somebody very special next week. Keep an eye on my website and you will find out who that is. And thank you all very, very much for coming, and thank you for sharing this space, and thank you for your questions. Thank you very much to Fleur and to Nick, and to most of all, of course, to Helen and Rick. Thank you so much for sharing your stories
and Amy
memories. So
Thank you all. Thank you all.
and Amy, without none of this would be happening.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Kaz, thank you, Norman and Mike. Everybody's saying thank you to Helen and Rick. Shane is saying thank you, and to Sharon, and everybody's sort of waving and saying thank you, and appreciating your stories.
We'll see each other one day.
John Rowe has just he wants me to give it a plug for the World Storytelling Cafe. So the World Storytelling Cafe is a marvelous thing, and there will be a link to on my website. You can just type it into Google, and a very, very swish website will come up. And apparently, I'm on at the cafe tomorrow. So I haven't seen the edited version. It's all a bit scary. So hopefully people will like it. And there is one of Duncan's stories and one of his songs in that. So if you want to hear me telling some of Duncan's material, and there's lots of other very marvelous storytellers. I think most of the people on here have done a brilliant set for the World Storytelling Cafe. I know Shane Ibbs certainly has, and Shona Lee has, and John Rowe obviously. So check that out. And now I've just gone blah 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 about loads of announcements. So now ignore all of that a little bit and go back into the boat with Morag and the minister and the seals and that wide expanse of shore and sea and seals and broken nets, and take that image away with you. And good night and thank you.
Thank you.